Debate has been discovered when Fox 19 Now's Michael Baldwin asked a simple question. Who is the first black officer for the Cincinnati Police Department?
Yeah, and they've always celebrated a man named Henry Hagerman. But as Fox 19 Now's Michael Baldwin explains, the answer is not that simple.
There are two schools of thought happening right now which surround this man. Was he Cincinnati's first black police officer, or was it someone else? Is it time to rewrite an important piece of the city's own black history? Our first stop for answers, the Cincinnati Police Museum on Reading Road.
Henry Hagerman, we believe, is the first black police officer in the Cincinnati Police Department.
I spoke with retired Cincinnati Police Lieutenant Stephen Kramer, who's worked at the museum. He tells me they have an account of all Cincinnati police officers hired after April 1st of 1886. They don't have any records before that because the state shut down the entire police department due to corruption. So most of the tales of the city's first black police officer come from a book called Cincinnati's Colored Citizens, written by Wendell Dabney in 1926. His research claims Hagerman was an officer in 1884, but was he right, or was it someone else?
We do know he existed because we have a picture of him. We also know that in that picture he's wearing a Cincinnati police uniform with a Cincinnati police belt, but he's wearing a badge that we know predates any existing badge going back to 1886. So it makes sense that he was here in 1884. We just can't prove it.
Another school of thought is here at the Cincinnati Public Library. We asked them, is it true? Is Hagerman the city's first black cop? They showed us numerous newspaper articles from that moment in time. They suggest what Wendell Dabney wrote in 1926 and what the city has believed for more than 90 years may actually be wrong.
Dabney attributes the first African-American policeman being hired, he says 1884. So these articles that I've been researching, these weekly columns, as I was researching them, I did come across a reference to the first African-American policeman, but it was not Henry Hagerman.
Who was it?
His name is Hiram Carroll.
Who is Hiram Carroll? There's no picture to show you, but Stephen Headley, a reference librarian for the Cincinnati Public Library, thinks the first black officer was Carroll, not Hagerman. He points to columns written in different papers of the time, like the Cincinnati Commercial Gazette, published in July of 1885. It reads in part, Mr. Hiram Carroll has been appointed on the police force. This is the first appointment of a colored man ever made on the regular force of this city.
And he's mentioned not only in these columns, but as I looked a little bit more into it, he's mentioned in two other newspapers as being a colored policeman. So to me, that gives a little bit of credence to him. And to add to that, I have found very little talking about Henry Hagerman as a patrolman.
So was Hagerman the first, or was it the man with no picture, just a name? Before you decide, here's the twist you didn't see coming. Was Carroll even a police officer? July 26, 1885, the Gazette wrote in part, quote, the appointment will go into effect August 1st. Carroll's job didn't last long. According to this article written in the Cincinnati Post on July 30th of 1885, he was no longer needed. In August of that year, the Gazette wrote, Henry Hagerman was sworn in yesterday as a special policeman. So that means he became an officer in August of 1885, not 1884, as we've believed for over 90 years. So who was first, Hagerman or Carroll, who apparently never made it to his first official day on the job?
That's a big question because like I believe, he's mentioned in a number of papers as being appointed. Now, whether he actually ever served, because there even another paper says that he was out by August, and given various reasons. One actually even says he was 3/4 of an inch too short. And another one said that some gambling investigation that they'd been doing was done. He wasn't needed because he used to be a custodian at one of the places where the gambling was taking place.
It appears we're taking steps into a new historical debate. Michael Baldwin, Fox 19 Now. The song "We Shall Overcome" is a symbol of the civil rights movement, and its origins are linked to Louise Shropshire, a black woman who lived in Cincinnati. But the origins of the song don't come without a little controversy.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
The iconic song is as synonymous with the civil rights movement as civil rights itself. Many experts say the song is derived from another hymn written by Louise Shropshire, who lived in Mount Auburn. It's called "If My Jesus Wills," published in 1942 and copyrighted in 1954. Here's a portion of it as performed by the We Shall Overcome Evening of Hope Mass Choir in Cincinnati. We spoke with Shropshire's grandson, Brian Shropshire Enix, at the Hirsch Recreational Center, where there is a giant mural in his grandmother's honor.
If Jesus Will started at Greater New Life Baptist Church. She was a music director there.
A similar song began making the rounds of protests. It was called "We Shall Overcome." Take a look at the words side by side. "If my Jesus wills" goes, "I'll overcome, I'll overcome, I'll overcome someday." Here are the words to "We Shall Overcome." "We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday."
There are stories.
Kevin Grace is the head of the Archives and Rare Books at the UC Library. He says there are still some out there that question whether she wrote the song. At UC, you'll find the Louise Shropshire collection, including photos, her musical writings. You can even find a record with Shropshire's group, the New Prospect Singers.
There are stories that sharecroppers and other field workers sang some version of that song, the facts of which are greatly in dispute.
In fact, a guy by the name of Pete Seeger was among the folk singers singing "We Shall Overcome." He was also part of a group that copyrighted it.
Pete Seeger, of course, was probably the best known folk singer we've had in American history, and he had a group, the Weavers, who recorded the song. There was a copyright made of their version of the song.
I think what happened was that they tried to change the concept of the song without changing the concept of the song. Okay. So they changed the word, which the words still had the same meaning as the first words that was taken out.
Seeger got worldwide praise, even though Shropshire's song came out first.
We kept contemplating that how could this person be saying that they wrote this song?
She had a very low profile, and let's be honest, she was a black woman, and who was paying attention to a black woman in the 1950s and 60s?
So we kept on exploring and digging until we got to the ears of somebody that would listen.
That person was Isaiah Gamboa. He's a Grammy award-winning music producer and friends with the Shropshire family. He wrote a book titled "We Shall Overcome, Sacred Song on the Devil's Tongue." The Cincinnati Enquirer reported in a 2013 article, Gamboa had a musical analysis conducted which found that "If My Jesus Wills" was likely the work from which "We Shall Overcome" evolved. A legal analysis agreed with that finding. After a lengthy court battle, a judge placed the song into the public domain.
We shall overcome. we shall overcome someday.
It appears Shropshire has overcome this debate, but she never lived long enough to see the victory. She died in 1993. Michael Baldwin, Fox 19 Now.
I'll overcome someday.
The family says the song If My Jesus Wills was written sometime between 1932 and 1942. You know, the Library of Congress recognizes We Shall Overcome as the most powerful song of the 20th century.
He was a fighter for freedom and civil rights.
Now, he passed away last month, but his legacy lives on.
That's right. Michael Baldwin gives us a look at just a few of the highlights of his vast career.
Judge Nathaniel Jones died at the age of 93 in January of 2020 in Cincinnati, but not before leaving an indelible mark on society. So much so, the news of his death even made the pages of the New York Times. The Cincinnati Chamber deemed him a great living Cincinnatian in 1997. Their first words to describe him: equal opportunity under the law. You could say that started at a very young age. Here is his daughter, Stephanie Jones.
So he heard the stories. He didn't know his grandparents or his great grandparents who were slaves, but he heard the stories and he knew the history of slavery in the family.
He saw firsthand how the law can help fight discrimination. While in college, Jones had gone to a restaurant and was essentially told his kind was not welcomed.
He used the law to address that discrimination, and he filed a complaint, and he agreed to settle the case, even though he could have gotten more had he gone to trial, but he also knew that the amount he was going to get would just about cover his legal fees, and it would make the point. The restaurant had to admit that they were in violation of the law and they had discriminated against him based on race.
He was the first African-American assistant United States attorney for the Northern District of Ohio in the 1960s during the Kennedy administration. For 10 years, he was the general counsel for the NAACP. That is a position once held by the country's first black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. Among his many signature cases, he once worked with Alabama Governor George Wallace, the George Wallace who tried to block 2 black students from entering the University of Alabama in the 1960s. Jones and other lawyers hit the ground running and helped convince the parole board and Wallace to pardon Clarence Norris. He was among 9 who were falsely accused of raping 2 white women in the 1930s. That case was known as the Scottsboro Boys.
They went through a long process, but were able to get the pardon. And he said at some point in one of his meetings with Wallace said, I'm not so bad a guy after all, am I?
Jones made his way to Cincinnati in 1979 after being appointed to the U.S. Circuit of Appeals. He would hold that position for 23 years.
Oh, he loved Cincinnati. He lived in Cincinnati for nearly 40 years, and he really, this became home. And both he and my mom really became key figures in the community. And he loved how Cincinnati embraced him when he first arrived here.
During an interview with Fox 19 in 2015, he spoke to us on race relations.
It seems as though each time we make progress, along comes some event to lead to a setback.
Jones died of congestive heart failure in his East Walnut Hills home, but his fight and legacy live on. Michael Baldwin, Fox 19 Now.
Now, Jones was given the Spingarn Medal. It's the highest award you can get from the NAACP.
Yeah, definitely had an incredible career, and Mayor John Cranley says that he's one of the 5 greatest Cincinnatians to have ever lived among us.
He spent 28 years in the Ohio House, sponsored some 600 pieces of legislation, even took on his own party when they wanted someone else to be state rep. William Mallory Sr. was a fighter and played a critical role in equality and justice across the country and here in Cincinnati. William Mallory Sr. was not only the state's first black person to serve as majority leader in the Ohio House, but he also used his legislative political mastery to help save things like the Union Terminal back in 1986 from being demolished. He was a key player in the construction of the riverfront as well as Fountain Square. I spoke with 3 of his sons about his historic career and rise to power.
He always wanted to use his position to help others. You know, he wanted to uplift those who were in need, help the marginalized, the disadvantaged.
The West End native had a passion for politics, which started at a very young age.
He was 12 years old when he wanted to attend a meeting that was going on in the West End, and he went to the door and wanted to go in. The guy says, you know, you're too young to come into this meeting. And another guy came to the door and said, what's going on? I said, well, this young guy wants to come to the meeting. He said, well, if he wants to come in, he can come in. So my dad went into the meeting, and that started his interest in politics.
Fast forward to 1966, where the first president of the West End Community Council is now running to be a state representative. And he wasn't going to let anyone hold him back, not even his own party.
My father, when he first ran in 1966, he ran without the party's endorsement. He ran actually against someone that the party was endorsing, and he beat him. And he never looked back.
Well, my dad was a people person. He didn't drive, so he walked the streets of the West End. He caught the bus everywhere he went, or he hitched a ride. And there are many people in this city who can say, yeah, I gave your dad a ride one time when he was going downtown. And that connection to people, I think, was really important to his leadership style and his success.
Mallory Sr. would serve the House for over 2 decades, retiring in 1987 with a bevy of legislative feats.
So in the time that he was there, and he was there for a total of 28 years, he sponsored or co-sponsored more than 600 pieces of legislation.
According to the Cincinnati Museum Center, his accomplishments include the first statewide prevention drug program and the Urban Minority Alcohol Drug Outreach Program, a home furlough program for nonviolent prisoners upon their release from prison. But what his sons feel may be his biggest accomplishment was taking on the establishment. That would be in the election of municipal court judges.
The suit was filed in 1986 because my father believed that the process of countywide at-large election of judges diluted the black vote.
Mallory believed there was discrimination involved in the election process for judges on a county-wide level, so he filed a lawsuit, once again challenging the establishment.
Ultimately, my father sued his own party. He sued the Democratic governor. He sued the head of the Board of Elections, who was GOP chairman as well. He sued other members of his party and the Secretary of State.
Well, I was with him on the day that he filed the lawsuit to change the way municipal court judges are elected. He came to me and he said, hey, I want you to take me downtown. Remember, he didn't drive. He says, I want you to take me downtown. And I said, oh, I have something else I'm working on. I can't take you downtown right now. He says, come on. He says, you're gonna be a part of history today. And I said, Dad, you say that every day. He said, oh, I'm serious. Come on, you're gonna be a part of history. So I took him down to the Westin Hotel, and there was a big press conference there. And that's when he filed the lawsuit to change the way judges are elected in Hamilton County. And he was right. That was the day that history was made.
It was a battle that lasted 6 years, but Mallory Sr. won his lawsuit, and its effects last till this very day. William Mallory Sr. passed in 2013. He had 6 children who all went into politics or public service.